On a September morning heavy with Highland fog, a 38-year-old traveler named Daniel Whitmore crossed the narrow spit to Kilchin Castle with a camera at his chest and a silver bracelet winking under the cuff of a green wool sweater. He had driven up from Leeds 3 days earlier, renting a small cottage in Dalmally, the kind with whitewashed walls, a coal grate, and a window that faced the loch. In the kitchen, he left a green enamel mug half full of strong tea sweetened with honey, a dog-eared copy of Castles of Scotland, and, tucked into his black-covered notebook, a small photograph of his mother. He checked the camera strap 3 times, the habit of a man who counted risks, and ran his palm along the rough castle stone at the gate as if greeting a living thing. The mist came and went in slow breaths, opening and closing views of broken battlements, arrow slits, and the ribbed ruin that felt older than weather. By evening he would not return. The lake here holds sound like a glass holds reflections. Gulls wheeled and vanished into cloud. A fisherman on the far shore later said he saw a fellow with a camera slip into the lower courtyards and pause at a slit of shadow where the steps go down. 2 tourists from Glasgow captured him by accident. The image shows a lean man, short dark hair damp with fog, the camera resting in his hands, the silver bracelet flashing as he shifts his grip. A German family, descending after him, heard the staccato of a shutter echo along a wet barrel vault and then the small metallic click of a flashlight being thumbed on. The air smelled of rain and cold iron. Somewhere below, water ticked at intervals, the ruins' slow metronome. Daniel was one for small, tidy rituals. He rinsed his mug as soon as he finished tea. He locked the door twice. He kept his notes in columns: weather, route, risks, penciling a tiny M at the corner of each page, a private mark for Mary, his mother. He photographed his boots on the threshold of every new place. Later he would label the shots with coordinates, time, and a word or two: Heather Light, Salt Crack, north of Sense. The evening before he vanished, he had underlined 3 things in the guidebook: East Cellar, collapsed arch, and sealed niche. He noted wind from the northwest, and slick stare, go slow. He added a line in careful script: do not touch what is kept. No one can say why. He was last seen at 2:15 p.m., stepping through a low arch toward the lower vaults with his camera and a small torch. He did not emerge. At 9 that night, when he failed to answer messages and the cottage remained dark, the landlady, Mrs. Blake, phoned the police. The next morning, officers from Oban logged the first report. Missing: Whitmore, Daniel, 38. Last observed: lower vaults, Kilchin Castle, approximate 1415. They found his pack propped neatly against damp stone at the entrance to the cellar corridor. Inside, the Highlands map with several ruined fortifications circled, a Swiss Army knife, a chocolate bar, spare batteries, and the black notebook. The torch was not inside. For paces farther, lying square to the wall as if placed and then abandoned, was his camera. The memory card remained. In the patrol car, beneath a sky undecided between rain and clearing, they scrolled the photographs. First, the outer walls, lichen, fissures, a window onto the loch. Then the stairs curling down, a closet with a fallen ceiling, an arch partly bricked, stone and old lime, the color of bone. Next, a jittered frame. The torch beam skates across rounded glass. The following image, steadier, shows a shallow shelf cut into a wall, a dark oval in cloudy liquid inside thick bubbled glass. The final frame is vertical light torn sideways, a smear of movement, no figures visible. The sequence runs from 1406 to 1415. After that, the card is blank. The search began the way trained people begin things, methodically, with rope and numbers. Mountain rescue volunteers strung orange lines along treacherous treads, set folding stretchers by the entrance, and pinned transparent overlays to 1:500 maps spread on a wooden counter near the souvenir rack. A senior inspector, M. Graham, said what supervisors always say when stone is wet and patience thin: no heroics. Wet rock betrays. Cadaver dogs worked the lower corridors while 2 live-scent dogs looped the courtyards. Divers in black neoprene slid into the cold at the peninsula's edge and combed the shallows. A helicopter marked a slow ellipse from dusk into night, white light dragging a pale road along the walls like a second, artificial day. The first day's protocol reads like a list, but lists have shadows. Sweep of floors 1 to 4, percussion sounding negative. Lower levels G2, G5 unstable, collapse/seepage. Odor noted near eastern niche, vinegar/aged liquid. That odor will recur in 3 separate reports and in 2 witness statements. Old vinegar, a cellar tang cut with something plant-like. People came from the nearby houses with thermoses and questions. An elderly woman with hair like tied fringe said, "In 17 a boy went missing here. They found his coat, not him." A man in a knit hat said he'd smelled a sting like pickling by the east wall when he cast for trout after sundown. A shopkeeper said smugglers used the lower passages long ago. Others shrugged, and one volunteer muttered, "Ruins collect stories the way they collect water." On the second day, a small, gleaming piece of metal was tweezed from a crack in the stone 3 meters inside the eastern corridor. A broken link from a silver bracelet. Two shallow scratches were visible on the oval, like the scratches on the clasp of Daniel's bracelet in a selfie he'd taken at Whitby in June. 10 meters farther, a thick shard of old glass lay in grit. Heavy, wavery, the sort of glass you see in 18th century bottles. They bagged both. The dog sat twice by the same arch where the last photograph had been taken. A volunteer marked the area with a black grease pencil, an X that blurred in the damp until it looked like a bruise. Maps did not square with stone. Corridors that existed on paper had long since fallen, and others, narrowing, twisting tracks, had been gnawed open by water and time. An archaeologist brought in on the third day tapped with a hammer along the base of the eastern wall and listened with his ear to the rock. "It's a living thing," he said finally. "It breathes toward failure." Pumps emptied 2 sumps. Beneath the brown skin the pits showed nothing a hand or camera could enter. The helicopter returned at midnight, and the ruin answered the beam with the hard glitter of mica and a single bat flitting like a moth at a bulb. By the end of the week, the online forums had done what they do: collated, enlarged, and argued. Some users overlaid Daniel's last 4 frames with public shots of the cellar and drew arrows. "That's a jar." Others swore the blurred frame held a human outline. The forensic analyst's email, filed and ignored by most, said simply, "No third person visible." The phrase never beats rumor. On Facebook, the corridor gained a new name, as places do in the mouths of strangers: the Blood Vault. On day 11, with wind pushing rain through the openings and stone loosening underfoot, the active search paused. The letter to the family used the phrase pending stabilization. Alice Whitmore traveled north and spent a night in her brother's cottage. She could not sleep, so she warmed her hands around the green mug and read his notebook by the kitchen light. On the last page, he had made 3 short lists: weather, route, risks, and then, below them, a single line that stopped without a period: "Best not to touch." She folded the photograph of their mother into her wallet and placed his travel book and the second bracelet, his spare, whole one, into a bag. In the morning, she walked to the gate at Kilchin and set the mug there beside a stone-scratched DW. 2 weeks later, contractors shoring the east wall took down a few courses of old brick from a shallow recess. A red-bearded worker named Collins slid his hand into the void and said, not loudly, "There's a shelf." They widened the gap enough to look without collapse. The shelf was part of the wall itself, a shallow slab worn smooth as if by fingers hundreds of years ago. On it stood a jar of thick glass. The lid was sealed with gray-brown wax, pressed in place by hands that had left blurred whorls. Inside, a dark liquid, water and something sour, cloudy, viscous, and an oval mass suspended like a shadowed fruit. The inspector who had warned against heroics held up a palm without looking away. "We do not open," he said. They swabbed the rim, took photographs, wrapped the jar in cotton, and laid it into a sterile bin. Beneath the shelf, caught in a seam, they found another sliver of silver chain. The laboratory was exact and cautious. The liquid analyzed as water mixed with acetic acid and traces of plant matter consistent with herbs. Angelica? Yarrow? The glass dated broadly to the 18th century. The organ, because no other word fit, was a human heart. The report, 2 months later, read, "Specimen exhibits maceration consistent with long-term submersion in acetic medium. Sex likely male. DNA yield insufficient for profile." A historian's note, stapled to the back, said, "Possible retention after execution as proof of sentence. Alternatively apotropaic. Deterrent against theft or sacrilege." The last line in the police summary was not meant to be cold, only careful. No direct connection to missing person established. But absence has its own gravity. If there was no direct connection, what did one broken link from his bracelet mean under the shelf? Why did the dog sit by that arch twice? People asked the questions in pubs and comments and walks along the lock, voices low and speculative, as if speaking at full volume might wake something. There were 3 main versions. The first was ordinary tragedy. Daniel slipped, struck his head, fell into a seam of stone the maps could not see, and the ruin kept him. The second was human harm, the kind people think they recognize: a stranger in the corridor, a shove, a body carried to water or to a cavity in the wall that could not be reached. The third was the version the ruin seemed to prefer, or at least the one it made easy to imagine: that the castle, which has held other lives in other centuries, quietly took back one more, and left a sign older than the missing man to insist that the place kept its own order. Alice came again in December, the locked pewter under a grayed-out sky. She brought an envelope of photographs. Daniel at Whitby as a boy, Daniel as a narrow-shouldered teenager in a first black jacket, Daniel as a man in the green sweater by a lighthouse. She set them beside the plaque the council had installed, in memory of Daniel Whitmore, who loved light and stone, and propped the top photo with a pebble. The wind touched the corner of the mother's picture, and she steadied it with a forefinger. At her wrist, she wore Daniel's spare bracelet with a new clasp that closed one notch tighter than before. "I'm sorry I couldn't take you home," she said to Stone, and a passing tourist lowered his camera and walked by as if privacy were a duty one stranger could pay to another. In April, a boy from Inverary swore he saw a light come and go 3 times in the lowest east window after midnight, as if someone inhaled and exhaled with a lamp. His father laughed, and then drove to the gate by himself and turned off the engine and sat listening. Wind scribbled in the reeds. A slow slap of water shouldered the rock. He left a paper cup of tea on the post because it felt wrong to arrive empty-handed. A retired constable who had worked the case until his back went bad told me, on a slow circuit of the site, "The thing about ruins is they've already had their accident. Everything after is after." He pointed with his chin toward the niche. "Men once kept things there to tell stories without words. A hand from a thief, a heart from a traitor, reminders. We keep protocols now. Different jars." Inside the cottage in Dalmally, the room reset itself around the absence. Mrs. Blake washed the green mug and placed it clean and dry on the right side of the shelf, where Daniel had been putting it, a small concession to an imagined order. In the notebook, between the lists that defined him, a few lines seemed to expand now that no one would add more. "Photograph with permission. Keep level. Do not lose the horizon. Best not to touch. Objects remain the way rooms remember people. The enamel with its chip that does not leak. The soft nap of the sweater, the travel book splayed face down, so the spine relaxes open to Argyle and Butte. A life is a string of small, repeatable motions. When they stop, air hangs, waiting for the next." The jar stayed in a secure room. The wax held the pressed prints of hands too old to read. The glass was scanned until the light itself seemed dulled by repetition. The fluid did not seem to belong to the jar as much as to the niche, a piece of the place carried from its correct coordinates. The clerk who typed the report washed her hands twice that evening without knowing why. People who handled the jar did that. Washed twice. Turned a key in their own door twice, the way Daniel had, as if repetition could keep chance from entering. On the east wall, the contractors marked chalk symbols for voids and loads and plugs of ancient brick. From 10 paces, the notations looked like a star map. The oval beside the shelf smudged over, redrawn, smudged again. Someone had wiped it out with a thumb and put it back darker, a nervous habit or a superstition, no one asked. Spring softened edges. Heather came up where boots had trodden, and the lock brightened from tin to silver. A school group visited, and a girl in a yellow coat slipped away to leave a postcard of a lake, the wrong lake, on the memorial shelf. "For your brother," she told Alice when a teacher guided her back. "So he can have more water." The teacher scolded her and later, alone for a moment by the gate, pressed her lips together as if a cold gust had touched them. The boy from Inverary returned with a cheap camera and shot the castle and son. His pictures showed the same broken teeth of wall, but in one frame a pale blot. Lens flare, almost certainly, hung exactly where the niche would be, and he decided to keep that one to himself. There were transcripts from the first week's radios, professional, stripped, and edged by things no one wanted to say. Delta 2 to command, at bend by east recess. Strong odor, vinegar, marking and pulling back. Copy. No unsupported entry. Affirmative. Dog Bravo indicates interest. Copy interest. Note 1041. Later. Command. Do you have visual on our headlamp? Negative, you're dark. Negative here also. Headlamp is on. Beam is being eaten. Words like that don't show up in summaries. Being eaten. The ruin digests light. That's how one of the divers put it, laughing once to make the line less eerie, and then he said it again, without the laugh. Rumors made and unmade themselves. Smugglers. Cult symbols. A Masonic sign in a carved stone where no sign was. A claim that in 1998 a man smelled the same vinegar and something herbal and saw a bottle on a shelf, but left because he had a train to catch. The old story of the boy in 1917, retold until the details flipped. Was it his coat or his hat? Until someone added a scarf, and then the scarf became a ribbon, and then the ribbon rotted to the more convincing nothing that rumors eventually prefer. The internet folded these things into maps you could zoom, lists you could save, theories you could wear like a coat new to you and good at making you warm. On a morning in May, a plaque went up by the gate, in memory of Daniel Whitmore, who loved light and stone. May the fog not hide him. The council meant it gently. Someone, no one admitted it, kept the green mug from time to time filled with tea steaming for a minute in cold air and then gone. The photograph at the center of the memorial, Daniel in his green sweater, began to pale from the edges inward, a sun nibble even under cloud. A steward in a green vest who fished plastic from the reeds said he had begun setting a single stone upright in the drift each morning as a way to order a corner of the world. If it's still standing when I come back, he told me, it's a good day. 3 times that winter the wind alone knocked it flat. There is no key to turn and end this. The ruin keeps the old jar and, one way or another, keeps its new missing man. Some evenings, when a north wind sharpens shadows and the lake's skin goes tight, a thin tapping can be heard from the east corridor. 3 light knocks, a pause, 2 more. It could be water finding a rhythm in stone, or glass shouldering air, or a bird fussing in a high recess. Or it could be nothing more than the ear making pattern the way the mind makes kindness. The impulse, confronted with an organ preserved past its rightful end, is to ask what sentence it carried, whose lesson it was. Perhaps the heart was meant to measure, like a weight on a scale. This much of a person is here, thus much is missing. I think of the small anchors that kept Daniel human in the world before the ruin accelerated its work. The scratched silver bracelet, the green enamel mug, the book that always felt open to the same page, the photograph of a woman who smiled the smile of someone who pretends not to worry, the green sweater he put on when the wind came off the water. A life can be traced by the path of such objects through a room. In Alice's kitchen, the mug stands on the far right of a shelf and the book leans toward it, as if 2 things might keep each other upright. The bracelet's new clasp closes with a faint click, 1 notch tighter than before. She turns the key in her door twice out of habit now, and sometimes she thinks she smells a thin, clean sourness near the cupboard and blames the jar of pickles until she remembers there are none. The last photograph Daniel took has been printed and handled so often that fingerprints cloud the margins. In the middle, still, is the smooth cut of a shelf and the thick glass whose surface caught his light. The blur after it suggests motion. His, the torches, the ruins, who can say? If you look long enough, you notice a thin reflection along the jar's shoulder that looks like a scratch, and if you want it to be, it can be the faintest image of a bracelet flashed and gone. The police release ends, as such releases do, with dates and times and a number for tips. The file remains open. The room in Dalmally has been let to someone else. The ruin keeps breathing in the weather. The lake keeps taking and giving synonyms for silver. And in a secure room sits a jar that looks truer in shadow than in light, holding a heart that resisted becoming earth again, a thing persisting past sense. Stories that end at graves let you imagine grass growing. Stories that end at plaques ask you to return and read. Stories that end in narrow places with glass and vinegar ask you to learn patience with not knowing. Somewhere between the shelves of the secure room and the shelf cut into the wall, somewhere between the last line in the notebook and the blur that follows the jar, the truth moves, the way light moves when fog makes it visible. If you stand at the gate on a damp morning and listen past gulls and map talk and the polite coughs of other visitors, you might think you hear a shutter click. One, and then another, and then a third, coming from the low mouth of the vaults, and you will not be able to tell whether the sound is new or very old.